Hello, and welcome to the Nerdy Photographer Podcast. I'm your host, Casey Fatchett, and I am here today with legendary photographer Pete Souza, who White House photographer for both Barack Obama, Ronald Reagan, as well as part of a Pulitzer Prize winning team. Uh, Pete, thank you very much for being on the show with us.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Casey. I appreciate it.
No problem. And before we get started, we're going to roll the dice breaker, and it is a 12. What is something small or unexpected that brings you joy?
Oh, that's an easy one. Um, I have two small granddaughters, and both of them, especially the 2-year-old who is the smallest, brings me joy.
That's great. And I've seen you like on other interviews and like talking about how you feel that your job now is uh, documenting them growing up.
Well, that's part of it. It's also being involved in their lives. There are times when that's more important than documenting their lives, to be honest with you. So I'm always trying to balance that, documenting their lives, but also being present and for them and interacting with them.
I think that's something that I've personally dealt with. My wife and I were talking about it this morning and last night actually about the the balance of, because I have a problem with when we're out, like we're traveling or doing something, and I find myself in photography mode and trying to pull back and just be in the moment. And this whole last year, I've been working on projects that keep me in the moment.
Well, and I think that um, it's probably easier now when they're younger. I mean, once they become older, and hopefully I'll still be around. I think they probably will become more self-conscious about the camera and my taking pictures. But for now, it's just this is who they've grown up with me, always with a camera, and so they're very used to me doing it.
It feels very natural. It kind of brings me to my like first question, and I've heard you speak about like be your seeing your role as a White House photographer as being a documentarian. How do you, maintain impartiality and stay present in those moments?
Oh boy, a lot to unpack there in terms of articulating that. Um, First, I would say that my background is as a photojournalist. I have spent a big part of my career photographing on staff at newspapers and then also freelancing for magazines, it, in both cases as a photojournalist. Um, Obviously, when you're the official White House photographer, you're working for the government. But it's not like you walk in the room and suddenly are going about making pictures any differently. I mean, I have an inherent way that I make photographs, and that didn't change when I, became White House photographer. I'm still, looking for a moment, composition, candid photography, that sort of thing. So, um, in many ways, the only different approach is that I was thinking of more photographs that were more timeless. Um, and when you work for a newspaper, what's your goal? Your goal is to have the front page of the newspaper the next day. That's what you're striving for. You want your picture to be um, chosen to be the front page photo. Um, you don't have those thoughts when you're a White House photographer. I mean, yes, the Obama administration did have an Instagram account when Instagram came out, and they would sometimes use my photos right away. But I was thinking long term. I was thinking about the historical aspect of what I was doing. Um, and I guess maybe the one difference in my approach would be if I were to go into a meeting in the Oval Office, I'd still be thinking the same way I did as a photojournalist, but I'd always try to make a few frames where I can see everybody that's in that meeting, for documentation purposes, to have a visual record of, okay, who was in this meeting. And I always thought it was important to have at least, a couple frames, even if they're kind of throwaway frames, but that for the historical
Right.
record, we can see everybody's in there.
Who was here? Who was a part
Who
of?
was
Like,
there?
who was
Yeah.
part of this? Yeah, I think that. I mean, I'm familiar with your work, and I think if somebody mentions your name, the first photo that comes to mind for me is the Situation Room photo with uh, when the Bin Laden raid, and the thing that I'm curious about and is when something like that is happening, like you're talking about, are you in the zone then as a photographer, or is there some part of you that in the back of your head is like, this is a moment historically?
Oh, I think both. I mean, obviously, the significance of that day was such that, uh, I knew it was a big day for our country. Uh, didn't know how it was going to turn out, because it could have turned out poorly. And my job in that on that day was just making sure that I was like hyper vigilant in terms of everything that was going on that day. I mean, the picture that you talk about, um, we were in that the raid itself lasted 40 minutes, but I was photographing, I think, 12 hours that day. There were meetings before, after, you know, uh, and so on. So, but I was hyper vigilant as to everything that was taking place. Um, I got so much to say about that
Go
day.
ahead, say
Um,
whatever you want
so,
to say.
I mean, I just said that I tried to make frames where you could see everybody in the room. The picture that has become the iconic one from when they were actually watching the raid, that picture, it does not show everybody that was in that room, because compositionally, I had a 24 millimeter lens, which is a very wide angle, and then I had a 35 millimeter, which is what that picture was taken with, 35 millimeter lens. The 25 was just too wide, and compositionally it didn't really work. I did make several frames with the 24 because I wanted at least for a historical record, as I talked
Yeah.
about, where you see, everybody that's in the room. But I kind of narrowed it down a little bit for the photograph. Because I thought it was the most effective composition.
I think
Um, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was
Finish
gonna
your
say
thought.
like so. It makes sense that there's kind of like two minds at play where you're like, okay, I am not only just documenting this, and in I've heard you speak of like Ansel Adams as a an influence in like making fine art out of photojournalism. And what do you feel elevates an image from a a snapshot, if you will, of what's going on, of what's happening in the room, or whatever, to that level of fine art photojournalism.
Well, I don't know if the Bin Laden raid photo is fine art.
I'm saying it is. I'm not. I'm
Yeah.
saying that is just like I think that there's something so striking about that in the eyes of all of the people in that shot. That is what draws me into that photo and why it pops up immediately. And it's such a historical moment. But I'm saying,
Well, and it, the uh um I think the viewer feels what I felt, hopefully, and the viewer feels what they were feeling,
yeah,
which was intense anxiety uh and nervousness probably about what was happening. Because look, you had, yes, these are the most powerful people in the executive branch of our government. They're all in that room together. But in this moment, there's nothing they can do to affect the outcome of what they were monitoring. It was, totally up to other people, meaning the special forces guys on the ground. And so, that's what I was feeling. I know that's what they were feeling. And hopefully that photograph captures that, emotion. So to answer your question, I mean, I think in this particular case, it's that this photograph provokes some emotion in the viewer, and I think it puts you there with them uh, in a unique way, despite the lighting in that picture sucks. It's not
it's fluorescent.
optimal lighting. It is what it is. I mean, it's like, and it's not even lighting and but I think the emotion in the moment overwhelms uh you mentioned Ansel Adams. I mean, Ansel Adams could not have used the zone system in that room. It just wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, I think that it's a common thread through your work. I think is drawing the viewer into the experience of that moment. Like there's a photo that you have from uh, firefighters outside, and it's like freezing in the the fire trucks are completely frozen over, and it just I feel like I'm drawn into that moment, and I can just feel how cold that moment is, and I think that's the sort of thing that you're like you're for. There's an emotion, there's a feeling that you're getting just automatically from those photos.
Yeah. I mean, I can remember that day like it was yesterday, and that was in 1982. I mean, I remember how I felt. It was minus 26 degrees that day, and I felt like that picture, shows freezing my ass off, and so I mean that's there's a song by the Lumineers. It's
Yes.
a musical band. I happen to be friends with those guys, but in any case, they came they came out with this record, their last record, Bright Side, and there was a song uh, called AM Radio. And they had sent me an early MP3 before it was actually released. And I remember I was driving um, through the upper peninsula of Michigan
Hmm.
listening to this MP3 that they sent me. And this song comes on for the first time. And there's a line in the song that goes, "If the photograph doesn't bring you back." And I swear to God, I almost drove off the road because I mean, the song was about a relationship and it didn't really have anything, it wasn't really about photographs, but that line
The moment, yeah.
just so speaks to me.
I mean, to me as well. I think that I like to tell people that photography is my favorite form of time travel because if it's good, it puts you right back in
Yeah.
that spot in the moment. People, the greatest compliment I feel as a can feel as a photographer is if somebody looks at one of my pictures and goes, I feel like I'm there. I feel like I am in that spot. I don't know if you feel similarly. That's
Yeah, I mean the um uh I can't remember. Well, this came up in a actually in another podcast, which was uh the when a still photograph first struck me was after the Kennedy assassination. I was 8 years old, and a couple of days later, I was watching live on TV as Lee Harvey Oswald, who assassinated Kennedy, was being booked at the Dallas jail. I'm watching this live on, my parents' little black and white TV, and Ruby shoots Oswald, as we all know. I'm watching it and I don't know what just happened. It was just kind of like, and then I saw the newspaper the next day and I saw, uh, um, now I'm blanking on his name, the guy from the Dallas Times Herald photograph, Bob Jackson, nailed the picture. And it's like, holy cow, this still photograph shows me what happened. Whereas the video that I was watching showed me nothing. So that was the first time where the power of the still photograph really hit me in a powerful way.
I think that there's a moment in history that I also have the Challenger explosion like is the same sort of like I don't know a feeling of um, we were watching it in school when it happened and then they just shut the TV off like our teachers just shut the TV off rolled the TV out and didn't say anything about it. You were in the White House during the Reagan administration uh, that time. I think that like afterwards, the images. I remember the cover of Time was just a picture of the explosion, and just like and that has that that moment has lived with me since then. Since I think I still have that copy of the magazine somewhere. Which
Well, yeah, I mean, and for the, you mentioned I was working in the Reagan White House. Reagan did not watch it live. I mean, if we go back to that that year, I mean, the shuttle launches had become somewhat routine. You never want to say routine, but and this one had been delayed a few days, and then and then the day of the launch, it was delayed a few hours, and so he wasn't going to just sit in front of the TV for 5 hours
right,
waiting for it to launch. So he went on with his business, and then heard that somebody came in and told him that there'd been an explosion, and he uh, went back to the little TV in the private dining room, and that's when I walked in and got pictures of them watching the replay of the explosion. Um, and that's an emotional picture too. Matter of fact, the if all I should say to start out, every picture that White House photographer captures, whether it was on film during Reagan or digital during Obama, every single frame ends up at the National Archives. So that day, while they're watching the replay of the shuttle explosion, I remember I was down low with a 28 millimeter Leica lens. And at one point, right after it exploded, Reagan closed his eyes for quite a while, like 15 or 20 seconds. And not in his head, but I think he was saying a prayer. Um, but when you looked at the pictures, it looked like it was a blank. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
we chose another picture where his eyes were open, but
When you,
In
if
my
you're
mind, the emotion for me was a picture that has never yet been seen. You can go to my proof sheet at the Reagan Library and see that frame. Um, so sometimes,
sometimes the still image fools you.
exactly.
I got a question about the process there. You brought it up a little bit that every frame goes to the National Archive. You photographed presidents in two vastly different technological eras, from Reagan with film to Obama shooting digital. And you've mentioned that like a lot of the like people didn't see Reagan, the photos from all the photos from the Reagan presidency until years later, whereas we were getting them in the Obama White House, where like you mentioned, they had an Instagram account and things are going out on social media, and you're seeing them. I don't know, the same day, in probably in some cases. But like, what is that? What was that process difference like from shooting film to digital? Is there a team of people who were behind the scenes who were processing your film or like taking your cards? Like, how does that work? I'm just there's
Okay,
the technical
let's
nerd part of me wants to is curious.
yeah, let's start with Reagan. Reagan, we shot all film. Michael Evans, who was Reagan's chief photographer during the first term, had made the decision to shoot color negative film. Um, that was a decision that was made before I got there. Um, I subsequently, when I came in the middle of the first term, within, I don't know, a year or two, I started also shooting black and white film because I just felt like the presidency, that, in my mind, went along with black and white film.
Mm-hmm.
Um, all of our film was processed at a Navy lab. Um, they all had, the proper clearances, and so that's where the film was processed. If the press office wanted to make a picture public, you can imagine the process.
Mm-hmm.
Like the film's got to go to the Navy lab, which was not on the premises. It was, I don't know, 5 or 10 miles away. Send the film there. They process the film. They make proof sheets. They send it back to the White House. That in itself is, what, 3 hours maybe? I
Yeah.
don't know, something like that. And then photo editor Carol Greenewalt at the time would choose the frame, the best frame, uh, show it to, I think I just lost my connection here.
No. Yeah.
Show it to the press office. They would sign off. We would call the lab, say, can you make 5 prints, 5 8 by 10 prints? Think how long that takes.
Yeah.
Color prints. They then come back to the White House, and then the 5 prints are handed out to, the AP, Reuters, whoever, Time Magazine, whatever. So that was the process. It did not happen that often, where we would do what was called a photo release. But that was essentially the process for the Reagan administration. For Obama, um, there was, well, I should say there was no such thing as social media or a website during Reagan. For Obama, there was whitehouse.gov, which was a website. So we would usually, the people that were in the website might want a picture, wouldn't say every day, but almost every day. And then we started doing behind the scenes albums at the end of every month. And the process for that was myself and photo editors on my team would choose those pictures. We would show them to somebody in the press office, and then we would post them publicly. So that's sort of the way the process worked. If the press office, the White House press office, wanted to do a photo release right away, obviously with digital,
Yeah.
you could do that within a half hour. I mean,
Yeah.
or probably less if you had to.
if you really needed to. I got a question. Like it seems like, and I think it might we might be tricked into it because of digital. It seems like you had unprecedented access to Obama and the Obama White House versus like what we see of previous, but it feels like maybe that's because of technology.
I don't think so. I, we didn't make any pictures. We didn't do any of these albums, these behind the scenes albums, until I think it was the fourth or fifth month of the administration, because I was trying to wrap my head around what the communications office was wanting to do. It was like this was a whole new thing to me.
Yeah.
Uh, and I was the holdout. I was, you know, believe it or not, because I was trying to figure out, okay, how is this going to work? And, if we do this, I was like, I am going to curate the photos. I didn't want like somebody in the press office going through all my photos and, choosing like, oh, Obama's smiling in this picture. Let's use
Right.
this one, that kind of thing. It was like, no, if we're going to do this, then we're going to do it the right way, which is show people exactly what is happening. I had, as my chief photo editor at the time, Alice Gabriner, who had been the director of photography at Time magazine, one of the best photo editors in choosing images, of anybody in the country. So, it was a very professional photojournalistic look. But obviously, if you're a government photographer, it's not photojournalism, but that I wanted that kind of feel to what pictures we were making public.
So this brings me to another question. How do you feel that the technology has changed? This switching out back into like journalism as opposed to documenting the presidency, but how the technology has changed journalism, specifically photojournalism. There's access, like we can turn around images very quickly. We can, we don't have to worry about like different film speeds in our cameras. There's just how do you feel that it has impacted journalism?
I don't know that I'm the right person to talk about this, other than I would say, I think there's some good things about it. There's some bad things about it. I happen to be, I happen to cover the early part of the war in Afghanistan in 2001, and technology was such that digital cameras were good enough for
Mm-hmm.
newspapers. They weren't great. They were good enough. So with a digital camera and a satellite phone, um, I was working for the Chicago Tribune. They could publish my photos the next day. That was kind of like the first war zone where that was the technology was such. So that's probably a good thing, where people were getting a immediate view of things. Um, the um, the I guess the bad thing. Well, just an observation more than I'll let rather than render an opinion. Um, if you were to um, take let's say any presidential event right now, and you were to look at within 2 hours, either Getty Images or Associated Press, you would see like 150 pictures from that event. Um, Whereas when we were shooting film, there was a lot more editing. When I say editing, I mean choosing of images that took place, and you would only see three or four pictures. So now it's like we're so overloaded with the number of pictures. It's hard to like,
Process
you
it.
know, process in many ways.
Yeah, it's saturated in a sense. We're visually saturated. And I think that, I mean, just the it also goes into the 24-hour news cycle of just like, everything is happening, so you don't have time to sit with an image
Yeah.
like we used to.
Well, and let's take the attempted assassination of the current president when he was running for
Yeah,
the picture that everybody used was him raising his fist up, which was kind of like you know he took advantage of a terrible situation where he almost got killed. And I remember the first time I saw, I went through all the pictures online and I saw Anna Moneymaker's picture of just seconds after he had been shot at, and he's down on the ground on all fours. And there's this look of uh, angst. You just could feel, this guy's just been shot. And to me, it's such a raw
I
image.
know the image you're talking about.
And nobody used that picture.
Yep.
Everybody used what I thought was just like, uh, I don't know, I don't want to say safe picture, but to me, that other picture was the one that, if you really think about it, to me, that was the picture.
It told the gravity of the situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know the image. Yeah, there's a sense of yeah, I wouldn't say sanitary in the image, that like the more uh, distributed photo seems to be like a more of a, yeah, safe, I guess is the word that you're.
I don't know if it's safe. It's just that the I mean, I would have loved to have been uh, in the newsroom when editors across the country had, were shown, here are the photographs that are possible, which ones should we use? And seemingly everybody used the same one.
Right.
And I was thinking, like, if I had been the editor, I would have been arguing for the other one. Very, very, you know, uh, I, I wouldn't let it go because to me that was the picture. But anyway,
Yeah, I think that yeah, it conveys the gravity of the event. This is an attempted assassination of a presidential candidate. Like it
yeah,
has more of the intensity of how people felt in the moment. I think it goes back to what you were talking about, Jack Ruby shooting Oswald, like that
yeah,
moment. Like there's the image that you're talking about from there. There's far more, because I think I've seen the podcast where you talked about the image, where they talked about, like, you talked about two different photos. There's one that's like that is very, I don't know, seems very sterile. There's not a lot because it's like just before, and then there's the one you're discussing where you really are up close and you're seeing the moment that Oswald gets shot, and it's saying, that image is saying so much more. And
yeah.
um, you're a big proponent of local journalism, having started in, as a local uh, uh, photographer. What can we be doing to promote more local journalism?
Oh man,
I know that's a
it's
heavy question. That's a
yeah. I mean, I think that is um, a sad situation in terms of journalism that uh, staffs at local newspapers have been decimated, um, and um, I think it's not a good thing for democracy, to be honest with you. I don't know what the answer is. Um, I just don't know.
I think about like when I grew up in Michigan and in a small town, and we had the local like county newspaper, and then there was our tiny town had its own little newspaper as well, and both of those have since like shuttered. Like the county newspaper, the bigger one, I remember we'd get a daily edition of the paper, and by the time when my parents passed away in 2020, I remember going there, like the paper would show up and it was 4 pages, and
Yeah.
and half of it was wire stories, and it reminded me of, when you looked at papers from the 1800s where you'd have, like, oh, this is the, San Bernardino story from my, like, it was all about like you're only getting like wire service stuff as opposed to like local news, and it's that.
Yeah, I mean it's I grew up. I mean, I started my career working for newspapers, and it's sad to see what's happened to all the newspapers that I used to work for. As I said, staff's decimated, and I think it hurts local journalism, obviously. Um, and I think it leaves a void in every community.
Yeah, knowing what's happening to your neighbors, we start to feel more and more isolated.
Well, and I think, this is my personal opinion, but I think this was one reason why COVID became so political is that, the local newspapers didn't have the staff to really report on what was going on. If we had found out, that our neighbors and friends were the ones that were dying and local newspapers were doing remembrances of them, um, maybe it wouldn't have become so political. I don't know.
Yeah, hopefully it would have. But yeah, as we transition into, I think, a related topic, um, as technology is progressing and we're seeing AI influencing visuals, as we talked about, you saying like just the bombardment of images that we see now. Like you're saying, like you're seeing hundreds of images from any particular event, and just the I want to use the word cacophony because it explains, but I don't know what visually that would be, of images. How do you feel, or what do you think about how AI is affecting how people look at visuals? How people are, whether they trust them or not, or whether they, are falling victim to fake images.
Well, I think we probably all are falling victim to fake images. It's something that the photojournalism community is wrestling with. I'm not really involved with that, but I'm keeping an eye on it, obviously. And there have already been several news photographs, I think, that have been faked in some capacity, whether through AI or other means. Um, and yet at the same time, like every photograph that I process now works its way through Photoshop. Um, it doesn't mean I'm like altering the content, but with the click of a button, I can, which essentially is I can tone a photograph so it looks good, right?
Hmm.
Um, but if you take it a step further, you could also use Photoshop to create a fake image very easily, and that's scary.
I think what frightens me is that the bar has been lowered in a sense. Like
Yeah.
you look at, like, we talked about Ansel Adams. Like he was doing work in the developing room and like, making toning changes and things like that is one thing that's different than like, okay, we're using AI to like create a whole different thing here that didn't exist. And I think that the fact that that has lowered the bar for bad actors to create false images is what frightens me in that thought.
No, totally. Yeah, it's become easier. The tools in Photoshop and other programs have become easier to do exactly what you're talking about, which is scary. I mean, I think that the um, the photojournalism community has certain guidelines on what can and can't be done, right? You can adjust highlights and shadows and color balance and dodge and burn and sort of like what we used to do in the darkroom, all considered acceptable. But then removing content or adding content is not acceptable in photojournalism.
Right.
And now the tools are so easy to to alter content that it's
I think that we're there's a necessity for some sort of verification, and I think that I know that Leica has already worked on like there's a like a stamp in their images now that will show you what it this is what it originally looked like. But and I think that there are other I think Canon's working on it as well. Like they're trying to counteract it. Hopefully we are able to like reach that point where that is what is there's an acceptance of because I feel like there's almost a, like I have to be skeptical of anything that I see now in some ways.
well, and I think that as a community, photographers and the photo community really need to educate the layperson,
Yeah.
because, like I said, every image that we see, or 95% of them, have made their way through Photoshop. That doesn't mean that they're altered,
Right.
you know. And I think that we use the word photoshopped as a meaning that
It's fake.
it's fake.
Right.
When in fact every news photograph works its way through Photoshop before you see it in the newspaper or online.
Right.
That does not mean it's fake.
Right.
That just means it's been opened in that program. The photographer has adjusted highlights and shadows, and color balance and sent it off. That does not mean it's been quote unquote Photoshop faked. It's
Right.
just, so I think we're not doing a very good job of articulating that to the layperson.
On a lighter note, I'm gonna okay. I've got I created this specifically for you. 3 shots. Is there a shot from an assignment in your career that you wish that you had got? Is there one that what's the one that got away?
Uh, I mean, there's probably many, many, many. But the one that sort of like, and I think every photographer's gone through this. There, so this is back in the 80s when I was working for the Reagan White House, and he was going to go out and throw the first pitch at, I don't know, I don't even remember, Baltimore Orioles game or something or other. And he was just not a natural baseball player. So he goes out to the Rose Garden with one of his staff and is like throwing a baseball, like warming up. And I'm like, he's in his suit, and I'm like, this is awesome. Um, I just thought like I got these great pictures of Ronald Reagan in the Rose Garden throwing a baseball, nobody else is around. It just had a really cool feel. And I remember going back to my office in the White House to rewind the film and realizing that I
Oh,
had not put film in the camera, you know. I mean, we've all, probably every single photographer that shot film back back then at some point experienced that. But that was like really agony for me.
Oh man, like it just like it. I'm sitting here with the first film camera I ever owned,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking about the times when like it slipped on the spool and just didn't like
Oh yeah.
quite it, and I
Yeah.
went to rewind it and I thought, oh, it's rewound, and then I open it
Right.
up and I'm just exposed half the roll of
Yeah.
film. And those moments of, oh, that is something that I think that can resonate with anybody who's shot film.
Yep.
All right, so next shot. Is there something? Is there a photo you decided not to take when it was like you used your judgment and said like, well, this isn't part of my job. This isn't, or do you feel like that's not that's never come up?
Um, there were photographs that were difficult to take. I mean, I'm thinking back during the Obama White House where um, he's meeting with families privately after mass shooting or some natural disaster, and it's just so hard to um, make those photographs. But I always felt that um, for the historical record, it was important that I do that. Um, uh, and I mean, the families knew that I would be there. They knew that we wouldn't make any of the photographs public. Um, but even still, those were really hard photographs to make. But I felt duty bound to go ahead. I mean, there were a couple times maybe I could, if I sensed that the family did not, or if it was going to upset the family in such a way, I wouldn't do it. But actually, I don't know that that ever happened. I think most of them understood. Um, I'm sure there are times in my career where I didn't make a photograph. I can't think of one off the top of my head though.
That's okay. So then my last question is, because you are very much into the historical nature of it, if there was any moment in American history that you could go back to cover as a photographer, what would it be?
Well, I mean, I guess given my um, two stints in the White House, um, I would say I would have liked to have been White House photographer during the Lincoln administration.
Mm.
Obviously a pivotal moment in our history. And um, I remember watching Steven Spielberg's film on Lincoln, and just like that's all I was thinking about is, oh my gosh, can you imagine the still photographs when he's wrestling with all these, decisions he's
Yeah.
going to have to make.
I mean, yeah, just the to be the fly on the wall. I think there's and to be able to document that. Funny story. I actually used to work in the studio. I used to do portraits in the studio where he had uh, his portraits done in New York City.
Yeah.
It was just like, and it just like every time walking in there, like thinking about being there in the same space is just a it's a strange feeling. So
We uh we had the film Lincoln. We screened it at the White House, and Spielberg was there, and then Daniel Day-Lewis, who plays Lincoln. He was Lincoln. I
yeah,
mean, it was like, um, and then after the screening, President Obama invited some of the actors and Spielberg up to the private living quarters of the White House, and um, it brought them into the Lincoln bedroom.
mm,
And at one point, uh, there's a copy, one of the signed copies of the Gettysburg Address in the Lincoln bedroom. And at one point, Daniel Day-Lewis went over to look at it, just him by himself. And I made a picture of that, but I had chills like as that took
Yeah,
place.
just there's a I don't know the energy is yeah, the energy is there. So as we sort of finish up here, what advice do you have for photographers who are looking to get into photojournalism, who are looking to document history in this, hopefully to try to like come close to your level, but like when they're starting out, what are those things that people, I think that people always see like the end results. They look at like photographers who, you know, are working in the White House, or they're like working on major events, and they go like, oh well, you know, like they just somehow materialized in that situation, and don't think further back, like how, where, like, you know, what are those first steps?
Yeah, I think it's hard these days. I mean, because of the lack of opportunities at daily newspapers, which I think is was the way to really hone your skills, learn about photojournalism. I think newspapers were uh, so important in being able to do that, and now we have so few staff jobs. That said, I think in general, I would urge photographers to, um, photograph every day.
Mm.
Um, in order to get yourself better photographically, I think you've got to, be out there every day photographing. Um, you got to show up. If you don't show up, you're definitely not going to make any good pictures, right? So, and then like, um, get uh, do some workshops. Um, there's a host of photojournalism workshops, University of Missouri, University of Kentucky, Western Kentucky. I mean, I could go on and on. The Eddie Adams workshop. I think all those workshops are invaluable in learning a skill set on how to be a photojournalist. I think you've got to be vigilant about the truth and uh, don't don't get caught up in um, trying to, you know, we talked about AI, but also in terms of, don't, don't, as a photojournalist, don't direct your subjects, learn how to um, go to a news event or any situation and take some time to figure out, okay, what is it that I want to show about what's taking place in front of me, and be truthful about it, but also be trying to decide what image, what situation is going to really show um, what I see and what I understand, and I'm going to present to somebody else. And that sort of goes back to, I think, doing it every day. You sort of learn intuitively how to do that. It's like, it's there's not like five bullet points. Here's how you become a good photojournalist. Um, this is one that you've got to. Every person has to come to it in a different way. I think in many ways.
I think that there's what you, maybe I'm wrong, but I think what you're saying is also intention. You have to come to it like not just as like I'm absorbing whatever is coming at me. I'm also being intentional about what is the story here and what's happening, and how I'm presenting it.
Yes, exactly. But I think your intention also has to be,
Truth.
well, truth. I mean, it's your obviously it's your. We all have our. I think if we had five photographers go cover the same event, we might look at it slightly differently, based on, our perceptions, our background, the way we see. Um, but we're all looking through that viewfinder, and the viewfinder, unless you're shooting square format, the viewfinder for all of us is the same. So what are you going to include inside that viewfinder? That's the key thing. And what are you going to not include? That's basically what photography is, right?
Exactly. I think that's a great place for us to wind up. Pete, it's time for our useless information for this episode.
Oh, okay.
How do you feel about edible currency?
What
Because,
is edible currency?
well, in the Aztecs and Mayans used chocolate as currency.
Oh,
Salt and black pepper were considered a luxury in the Middle Ages, so much so that they were used to pay rent and taxes.
well, I think if somebody were going to send me some chocolate, then I could deliver some services for them. I don't know that I would like if somebody wanted me to photograph their wedding, they'd have to send me a lot of chocolate, you know.
The really good stuff, not just not off the shelf stuff.
No, no, no.
Pete, I want to thank you very much again for being generous with your time, coming on the show. I really appreciate it. Where can people find you?
Uh, well, I should direct them to my website, but I haven't updated it in like, I don't know, 5 years or something. PeteSouza.com. And I'm fairly active on still on Instagram, which is at Pete Souza. I quit Twitter. I'm not really on Facebook. So probably Instagram is where you will see a lot of my archive work that I kind of post almost every day. And one of these days I'll get around to updating my website.
Well, I'll include those links in the episode notes for this. Pete, thank you very much.
You bet, Casey. Thanks for having me on.